My name's Asher Quinn. I was 19 the night my parents kicked me out, no tears. No reason. Just my father's cold stare and my mother pretending not to hear. 8 years later, I walked back into their lives at my grandmother's while reading, and found out she'd left everything: the cabin, the land, the legacy to me. The silence that followed felt like thunder under my skin. They thought they could cut me out forever. But what they didn't know was, I came back ready. And this time, I wasn't leaving. Before I continue, tell me where you're watching from, and hit like and subscribe if you've ever been betrayed by family. Because this story, my story, isn't just about an inheritance. It's about what happens when the people who should protect you try to bury you instead, and how the quietest revenge is the one that actually lasts. The first sound I remember from that house wasn't laughter. It was the buzz of a flickering light above the kitchen table, and my father's fork tapping the plate like a metronome. The rhythm of control. I was 8 when I learned silence was safer than questions. Dinner was always the same: Dad at the head of the table, Mom hovering between us, measuring portions like a scientist afraid of imbalance. If my father's mood was good, he'd talk about town meetings or the new community center project. If it wasn't, he'd stare at me and find something to fix. Sit up straight, Asher. Stop slouching. Use your head for once. Each command dropped like a nail. I'd nod. Chew faster. Swallow the words I wanted to say. Across from me, my half-sister June was still little 6. Maybe her legs swinging, her plate always just a bit fuller than mine. Mom would smile at her, tuck hair behind her ear, say, "Eat, sweetheart." Like we were living in a commercial. I noticed those things. Even then, the small differences, the extra warmth she gave to the child who hadn't disappointed Dad yet. Sometimes, I'd sneak glances at the clock. The second hand felt louder than breath. I'd imagine it breaking through the glass and cutting the tension clean in half. But time never saved anyone in that house. I didn't know it back then, but every dinner was practice for later: the quiet punishments, the invisible scoreboard, the way love could be rationed like gas in a crisis. The summers were different. They belonged to Grandma Ruth. She lived 3 hours north, up where the trees were so thick you could smell sap and rain even in July. Her cabin sat by a narrow lake, its porch creaking like an old friend greeting you. When Dad dropped me off, he never came inside. Just left the car running, trunk open, said, "Don't make trouble for her," and drove away. The air always felt lighter once his tires hit the gravel road out. Grandma would wave from the porch, apron dusted with flour, glass of sweet tea sweating in her hand. She didn't hug much, but when she did, it was firm, grounding, like saying, "You're real, you exist, I see you." She taught me how to gut a fish, patch a torn screen door, hammer a nail without splitting the wood. "Don't waste motion," she'd say, cigarette dangling from her lip. "And don't waste words. They both leave marks." At night, we'd sit by the fire, her telling stories about the war or my grandfather I never met. She called him a good man, just quiet. Maybe that's where I got it. When I was 12, I asked her why my father always seemed angry. She looked at me for a long time, smoke curling between us, and said, "Some men mistake control for love, and some women mistake silence for peace." I didn't understand it then. I do now. Those summers were my reset button. The rest of the year was noise grades, chores, corrections. But up there, by the lake, I was enough. No report cards. No rules about tone or posture. Just work, sweat, and the reward of a chair that creaked like laughter when you sat down too fast. When I was 15, things at home sharpened. Dad started calling me dead weight. I'd taken a part-time job at the hardware store, saving for a camera. Mom found the envelope once, counted the money, and left it on the counter. When I came home from work that night, it was gone. Dad used it to buy a new drill set for the house. He didn't even look guilty. "Don't pout," he said. "This family gives more than it takes." I remember staring at the empty spot on my shelf where the camera was supposed to go. It wasn't about the money. It was the message. Even the things I built on my own could be taken if he decided they were his first. I didn't tell Grandma that summer. She would have driven down herself and read him his last rites. I just worked more hours, kept my head down, and started writing little notes to myself in the margins of old receipts: tiny promises. "You'll get out. You'll build something that's yours." By 17, the house felt like a prison built from politeness. We still had family dinners, still went to church on Sundays, still smiled for pictures that went straight into drawers. But the air was heavy, like it knew too much. Then came college. I made it through a year before the panic attacks started small at first, then full storms that left me gasping. I dropped out, came home with boxes, shame tucked in every fold of clothing. Dad didn't say, "Welcome back." He said, "So the experiment failed." I got 2 part-time jobs, saved what I could, paid him rent when I had it. But it wasn't enough. It never was. Every conversation turned into a ledger, every gesture, a debt. And then, one night, everything broke. It was late spring. I just finished a shift at the gas station, grease on my hands, exhaustion in my bones. When I walked in, the lights were already on. Dad was waiting by the table, the envelope of rent money in front of him. "You're short," he said. "I'll make it up next week." I told him. Hours got cut. He shook his head. "You think life's going to wait for your schedule? You think the world owes you patience?" Mom stood by the sink, eyes on the floor. June peeked from the hallway, her face half in shadow. I tried to explain something about bills, gas money, but he wasn't listening. He leaned closer, voice low, venom sweet. "If you want to live like an adult, do it somewhere else." I thought he was bluffing. He wasn't. 10 minutes later, I was standing outside with a half-zipped suitcase and a backpack slung over my shoulder. The porch light made everything look staged, like a bad play. Mom didn't come out. Dad watched from the doorway, arms crossed, silhouette sharp against the kitchen light. No hugs, no goodbyes, just a cold statement. "Sun's down. Don't be here when it's up." The door clicked shut behind me. I remember the night air wet, electric, full of crickets that didn't care my life had just cracked. I walked until my feet blistered, slept in my car, ate whatever the gas station sold half price after midnight. I didn't cry. Not then. Grief felt too expensive for someone like me. What I didn't know that night was that Ruth had already written my name into her will, that she'd been watching the distance grow and had made her own quiet choice. 8 years passed. I built a quiet life. Cheap apartment, job at a bookstore, coffee that tasted like cardboard, but kept me alive. I never called home. They never called me. Only Ruth stayed letters, birthday cards, sometimes a check folded inside with a note. "For your next step, keep moving." Then, one day, the call came. Caleb, the lawyer. Ruth was gone. I sat there, phone to my ear, the city noise buzzing around me like static. "She wanted you at the reading," he said. And that's what brought me back up the mountain to the cabin, the will, and the envelope with my name. I didn't know it back then, but coming back wasn't about inheritance. It was about unfinished ghosts. Driving back up the mountain after 8 years felt like time had folded in on itself. The road hadn't changed, still narrow, still lined with pines leaning in like they wanted to listen. The closer I got, the heavier the air felt, thick with the smell of smoke and memory. I told myself it was just the altitude, but my pulse said otherwise. When I pulled into the gravel driveway, I saw 2 cars already there. A shiny black SUV I didn't recognize, and a gray sedan that looked like it had never left suburbia. I cut the engine and sat still for a second, letting the silence ring. I wasn't ready, but grief doesn't wait for readiness. The cabin looked smaller than I remembered, but stronger too. The same chipped green shutters. The same tin mailbox that tilted slightly right. For a second, I almost expected Ruth to step out with her apron and a cigarette, scolding me for letting the coffee burn. Instead, the door opened and I saw my mother, Asher. She said like she'd seen a ghost she wasn't sure she wanted back. Her voice was too bright, too smooth. "I didn't know you were coming. You were invited?" My father added from behind her, eyes narrowing as if the answer might change the temperature of the room. I met his gaze, steady. "Caleb called. Said Grandma's will was being read today." Sloane appeared behind them, tablet in hand, heels sinking into the rug like she owned the place. "Wow. It's been, what, 8 years? You look different." I wanted to say something cutting, but the lawyer stepped in before I could. Caleb was exactly as I remembered: pressed suit, calm eyes, voice that could defuse a bomb or start one depending on how he used it. He nodded toward me. "Asher, glad you made it. Shall we?" Inside, everything smelled like cedar and dust. The fireplace was lit, logs crackling low. The same sound I'd fallen asleep to as a kid. My father stood by the mantel, staring at the framed photo of him, Ruth, and his 2 siblings from decades ago. His jaw tightened, then he looked away. Caleb began reading. Most of it was simple, small gifts to friends, keepsakes to neighbors. Then he paused. To my son Peter and his wife Diana, I leave the Buick in my vinyl collection. Mom blinked. The Buick and the records? Caleb nodded, already moving on. To my granddaughter Sloane, I leave the antique silver set and a note that says, for hosting the worst Thanksgiving I ever endured. The silence cracked. I almost laughed, but I bit it back. Then Caleb reached into the folder and pulled out a smaller envelope. The edges worn. And this, he said, is for Asher Quinn, to be read by him alone. My father's jaw flexed. What's in it? Caleb's tone stayed even. That's not for you to know, Peter. He handed me the letter. Ruth's handwriting curved across the front, delicate but firm. Just seeing it made something behind my ribs ache. Mom straightened suddenly. Her smile stretched thin. What about the property? You mean the cabin? Caleb asked. Yes. Ruth always said she wanted the family to have it. Her voice trembled at family. We've already talked to a few contractors' plans to renovate. Maybe turn it into a small lodge. It's the perfect location. Caleb held her gaze. The cabin wasn't left to either of you. Then who? Dad snapped. He looked at me. Ruth left it to Asher. The cabin, the land, all of it. The air froze. The sound of fire popping filled the silence like gunshots. My father's eyes went sharp and mean. My mother's hand fluttered to her mouth. Sloane's tablet slipped and hit the rug. I didn't smile. I just sat there holding that envelope, the weight of it heavier than any gift. For once, I didn't feel small. That was the first time in my life I saw my father speechless. He recovered fast. This has to be a mistake. It isn't, Caleb said. The will was finalized, notarized, and filed. Twice. She wasn't in her right mind. Mom argued, voice cracking. Caleb shook his head. She was. 2 cognitive screenings, both cleared. Sloane chimed in. Maybe Asher pressured her, took advantage. She was old. Lonely. I almost laughed. You think I manipulated her? The last time we talked, she yelled at me for overwatering her geraniums. My father stepped closer, voice low. You think you've won something? You have no idea what you're getting into. Maybe, I said, but neither did you when you kicked me out. He flinched just a flicker, but I saw it. After the reading, they filed out one by one, leaving behind the smell of perfume, resentment, and burned pride. I stayed seated, staring at the envelope in my hands. The firelight flickered across my name. I didn't open it right away. Part of me wanted to drag it out, make them wonder. For once, I had the upper hand and the silence felt like justice. When I finally read it that night, alone by the window with a glass of her whiskey, Ruth's voice came back to life on the page. If you're reading this, I'm already gone. I always saw you, Asher. Even when they tried to make you disappear. The house wasn't warm after your grandfather passed. But this cabin still has a heart. Keep it or don't, but choose for yourself. Don't let them rewrite what's yours. Her words broke me open in quiet ways. No shouting, no tears on the floor. Just a slow release, like a door unlatching in my chest. The next morning, I found my parents still there. They pretended it was grief, lingering. I knew better. Sloane had a binder, now color-coded pages, profit projections, buzzwords like rustic luxury and family heritage. She pitched it like a business meeting. You can keep your name on the deed, Asher. We'll handle the work. Split the profits. My father nodded, voice calm and venomous. You're not exactly equipped to manage property like this. Be reasonable. Mom's tone was soft, almost kind. We just don't want you overwhelmed, honey. I let them talk until the words blurred, then said, no. They blinked. No, I'm not selling. I'm not flipping it. And I'm definitely not giving it to people who threw me out like garbage. Dad's expression curdled. You'll regret this. Maybe, I said, but at least the regret will be mine. They didn't leave that day. They wandered the property, whispering, circling like crows that couldn't find a place to land. That night, I found the safe in Ruth's old office pried open, the rug shoved aside, dust still floating in the air. Empty. When I asked about it the next morning, no one looked me in the eye. You're being paranoid, Dad said. Maybe, I told him. But paranoia is just experience with a memory. That's when I started recording things. Photos, notes, a hidden camera Ruth once used to watch for deer. Something told me this wasn't over. And I was right, because by the end of that week, my mailbox was gone, my tires slashed, and a realtor had called Caleb asking if the Quinn family was ready to list the cabin. I remember standing in the doorway of that cabin, the same spot where my life had split once before, and realizing this was my second eviction notice only this time. I wasn't leaving. What I didn't know then was that this fight wasn't just about land. It was about bloodlines, buried truths, and one final secret Ruth had hidden under the floorboards, something that would rewrite everything we thought we knew about who belonged to this family. The first night after the reading, the cabin didn't feel like a home. It felt like a bunker. Every sound made me twitch, the creak of the rafters, the crackle of the fire, the crunch of gravel outside when the wind shifted. I knew they hadn't really left. I could feel them still, orbiting the property, waiting for me to slip. The next morning, I found Sloane standing by the lake in a wool coat and designer boots that didn't belong in dirt. She smiled like we were meeting for brunch. "You really should think about it," she said, eyes on the reflection of the trees. "You could make serious money here. Your grandmother sat on a gold mine. And you're what's selling paperbacks for a living?" "Maybe I like paperbacks," I said. She smirked. "You like losing." Her words stung more than I wanted to admit. I didn't answer. I just watched her get into her SUV, the tires spraying gravel. The smell of exhaust lingered long after she was gone. That evening, I noticed the bookshelf in Ruth's office had been moved. Not much, just an inch, but enough. The rug was bunched up, the dust disturbed. I crouched, fingertips brushing the floor. The outline of the safe was clear, metal scratched and cold. It was empty. Ruth had told me once, if something's locked, it's because someone's afraid of what's inside. I wondered who that someone was now. At breakfast the next morning, Dad sat across from me, cup of coffee steaming between his hands. He didn't say good morning. "You planning to stay long?" "As long as I want," I said. He looked around the cabin. "You think this place belongs to you?" "It does." His mouth twitched into something close to a smile. "Nothing stays yours for long, Asher. Not when you're careless." He left his mug half full on the table. The coffee inside was still hot. By the third day, I'd stopped sleeping. Every time the wind hit the cabin, I thought it was a car door. The deer cam I'd set up by the shed caught movement at 2:17 a.m. A flashlight beam, quick and jerky, near the side window. I didn't show anyone. Not yet. The next morning, my mailbox was gone. Just the post, splintered and leaning. I drove into town for supplies, replacement screws, lumber, a new padlock for the shed. When I came back, the mailbox lay flattened in the ditch. I called the sheriff. He showed up late, hat in hand, bored. "Could have been kids," he said. "Pranks happen. Kids don't know the combination to a safe," I said. He sighed. "You have any proof someone broke in?" "Not yet." "Well," he said, "bring me something I can see." Then he left. That was the moment I realized I wasn't just defending property. I was building a case. That night, I moved the camera inside, mounted it on the bookshelf facing the office door. Hidden, just in case. I felt ridiculous, paranoid, maybe even obsessive, but Ruth's voice echoed in my head. "You're more than what they told you." The next morning, the camera was gone. The door was cracked open, and the bookshelf stood exactly where it had before, like nothing had ever been touched. But the space where I'd mounted the camera had a faint square outline in the dust. Someone had been careful, too careful. I didn't confront them. Not yet. I wanted evidence that could scream louder than my words. Instead, I went into town and met with Caleb. He looked older in daylight. A man who'd seen too many polite wars over wills. "They're circling," I told him. He nodded. "I've seen it before. They'll push until you push back. Then help me do it right," I said, quietly. He gave me a look, half admiration, half warning. "Quiet revenge?" "Something like that." When I came back that afternoon, 3 figures stood near the porch: Mom, Dad, and Sloane. Mom held a binder, her hands shaking just enough to notice. "We want to talk," she said. I leaned against the railing. "Talk." Sloane flipped open a page full of numbers. "Look, we can make this work for everyone. You keep your name on the title. We handle renovations, management. We even front the costs." Dad added, "It's smart business. You're not a builder, Asher." Mom smiled, soft and pleading. "Honey, This was your grandmother's dream. To see the family together. I stared at them. You mean the family that threw me out? Mom flinched. Sloane sighed. Don't be dramatic. I looked at my father. You think you can charm your way back in with spreadsheets? He stepped closer. You think you can handle all this alone? I already am. His jaw set. And for a moment, the mask slipped. The man who'd kicked me out at 19 stared back at me cold. Certain. Cruel. Then he turned and walked off, Sloane trailing him. Mom stayed a second longer. Eyes glassy. You're making a mistake, she whispered. I didn't answer. The door closed behind me with a sound that felt final. But I knew it wasn't. Because when people like them say mistake, what they really mean is, you stop playing by our rules. And that's when I realized the next move had to be mine. The next week blurred into long, tense hours. I worked during the day at the bookstore downtown, then drove back to the cabin before dark, scanning every passing car, like it might be theirs. The small-town rumor mill had already started spinning. At the diner, whispers followed me like smoke. That Quinn boy. I heard one woman say behind her coffee cup. You know he's not really Peter's kid, right? It took everything in me not to turn around. Instead, I paid my bill, tipped double, and left. That rumor born out of spite and desperation was spreading faster than fire on dry pine. It was their way of softening me up, make me doubt where I belonged, make me small again. That night, I called Nora Pike, the local journalist Ruth had once trusted. Her voice was steady but curious. You think your family's trying to discredit you? I don't think, I said. I know. We met the next day in the bookstore. I gave her copies of the photos I'd taken, the scratches on the safe, the missing camera bracket, the tire marks near the porch. She looked through them like puzzle pieces. You have just enough to start a story, she said. Not enough to finish one, but if you let me dig, I'll find the rest. Dig careful, I warned. They don't like losing. She smiled. Neither do I. By the end of that week, another hit came. The local real estate office called Caleb asking for a quote on property tax adjustment for a sale I hadn't authorized. The buyer was listed under Blue Alder LLC. Caleb looked it up and sent me the file. The registered address matched Sloane's old marketing agency in Seattle. It wasn't sloppy. It was deliberate. I called Dad. You're trying to sell property that doesn't belong to you. He didn't even pretend. We're protecting family interests. You're too emotional for this. Funny, I said. Grandma didn't think so. He exhaled sharply. She made mistakes. You're one of them. The line went dead. That night, I found my front door unlocked. Nothing taken, but everything felt touched, the drawers slightly open. Papers shuffled. I checked the hidden spot where Ruth kept an old memory card tin beneath the floorboard. Gone? That was the moment my anger cooled into precision. I stopped reacting. I started documenting. Every visit, every phone call, every offhand comment recorded, backed up and time-stamped. Mom started sending emails, carefully worded, full of guilt. We're just trying to keep peace in the family. It's not too late to work together. Attached were scanned photos, Christmas mornings, birthday cakes, the kind of nostalgia you weaponize when logic fails. I didn't reply. Instead, I fixed the old trail cam Ruth used to watch deer, mounted it inside facing the office. The new memory card held a full week of footage. Every night, I checked it before bed. Empty. Empty. Then, on the fifth night, movement. A shadow. A flashlight beam sweeping across the rug. A figure kneeling near the safe. I paused the frame, heart pounding. The shape of the shoulders. The jacket. It was Dad. I sat there in the dark, the only sound the ticking of the wall clock. A small laugh slipped out of me, not from humor, but disbelief. He really thought I'd break first. The next morning, I printed the still frames and drove to Caleb's office. He studied the images quietly. This is enough to start pressure, he said. Not enough for charges yet. Then let's build pressure. He nodded, step by step, quietly. When I returned that evening, the mailbox was back replaced, freshly painted, with a note inside. Family shouldn't fight like this. Let's talk. No signature, but I knew the handwriting. Mom's. For a second, I almost felt something like pity. Then I remembered the rumor, the forged sale, the empty safe. I folded the note and slid it into the file folder labeled Evidence. That weekend, Nora called. You might want to sit down, she said. I traced Blue Alder LLC further. The corporate email on the listing metadata belongs to Sloan Mercer. It was the cleanest confirmation yet. 2 days later, June reached out. A text first. We need to meet. I found something. We met at the back booth of the diner, the same place people whispered about me. She looked pale, trembling, holding a folder to her chest. They told me not to talk to you, she said, but you deserve to know. Inside the folder was a draft of Ruth's will, but the font, format, and signature date were all wrong. Someone had tried to replicate it, but the margins didn't match. Where did you get this? I asked. It was in Sloane's car, June whispered. She told Dad it was a backup copy. But it's fake. I sat back, the noise of the diner fading into a hum. Everything connected now: the rumor, the missing files, the fake sale. They weren't just angry. They were orchestrating a coup. June's eyes filled with tears. I don't want to be like them, she said. Then don't. I told her. Help me make it right. She nodded, wiping her face. I will. When I drove back to the cabin that night, I passed my parents' house down the hill. The lights were on, silhouettes moving inside. For the first time, I didn't feel fear. I felt clarity, because the thing about growing up in a family that weaponizes silence is you learn to turn quiet into a scalpel. And I was ready to cut. The town hall smelled like dust and pine cleaner, like 100 years of secrets trying to stay polished. Rows of folding chairs filled the room. Half the town crammed in to see how far the Quinn family would sink. At the front sat a rectangular table with name cards. Mediator, legal counsel, property owner. That last one was mine. I walked in carrying Ruth's letter, a thermos of coffee, and a folder thick with proof. Garrett, sorry. Caleb now sat beside me, calm as a winter pond. Across the table, my parents and Sloan took their seats like actors about to perform a tragedy they'd written for someone else. The mediator, a woman in her 50s with gray curls and a voice like a gavel, called the meeting to order. This session is to mediate the property dispute concerning the Whitaker cabin. All statements will be recorded for public record. Dad leaned back, smiling faintly. Appreciate everyone's time. This shouldn't take long. I stayed quiet. Caleb tapped my knee once under the table. Steady. Wait. Mom's eyes darted around the room. She looked nervous, but not guilty. Just tired. Sloan, on the other hand, had her armor on, lipstick perfect, nails immaculate, expression smooth enough to skate on. The mediator gestured. Mr. Quinn, since you initiated the complaint, you'll speak first. I stood. My voice didn't shake. This isn't about money or sentiment. It's about honoring my grandmother's wishes and protecting what she left behind. Since the reading of her will, I've faced trespassing, forged documents, and property listing attempts made without my consent. Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Dad's smile faltered. That's an exaggeration. I slid a photo onto the table, the image from the trail cam. Him kneeling beside the safe. Flashlight beam across his face. You broke into her office. That's circumstantial, he said quickly. Then maybe this will help. I nodded to Caleb. He pulled out a USB drive, handed it to the mediator, and pressed play on the projector. The room filled with grainy footage, the attic. My father's voice, sharp and low. All we need is a draft, or we make one. She'll never know. Sloan flipping through papers. My mother hovering like a ghost in the corner. A collective gasp swept the room. The fire crackled in the old stone hearth at the back of the hall. Sloan's face went bloodless. That's not what it looks like, she said, voice cracking. Then what does it look like? I asked. She opened her mouth, but nothing came out. The mediator leaned forward. Were you attempting to recreate a legal document belonging to the late Ruth Whitaker? Sloan stammered. I was just helping. Dad slammed his hand on the table. Enough of this circus. That video proves nothing. That cabin belongs to the Quinn family by right. Blood trumps paperwork. Blood? Caleb said coolly. Interesting choice of word. I reached into my folder, pulled out a sealed envelope. You mean like this? Dad froze. This, I said, placing it on the table, is Ruth's old paternity record. Dated 1998. She kept it sealed until after I turned 21. You spread rumors I wasn't your son, Peter. You told people I was an outsider. But this, I tapped the envelope, proves I'm yours. Unfortunately for you. It also proves she was done protecting your pride long before you realized. The silence that followed wasn't disbelief. It was the sound of reputations cracking. Mom covered her face with both hands. Sloane sat rigid, jaw clenched, eyes darting toward the exit. Then the door at the back of the hall creaked open. Every head turned. June walked in. The little sister who'd spent her life walking on eggshells. She looked different, older, steadier, but her eyes were the same, quiet and watchful. She stepped forward, clutching a thin manila folder. "I have something to add," she said. Her voice trembled, but she didn't stop. Dad and Sloane didn't just talk about forging Grandma's will. They did it. Dad shot up from his seat. "June, sit down." She didn't. "I found this in Sloane's car the week after the funeral." She handed the folder to the mediator. "A draft. Wrong dates. Wrong signature line. It's fake." The mediator examined it. "The notary seal is missing, and the witness signatures are duplicated." Sloane whispered, "Oh, God." Dad tried to recover. "She doesn't know what she's talking about. She's been manipulated." "Enough," June said quietly, and for once, he obeyed. Then my phone buzzed on the table. An email notification. From an anonymous address. Subject line: "Play this." I opened it. A short audio clip. I hit play before anyone could stop me. My father's voice filled the room, unmistakable. "Evelyn's signature won't hold if we can show she wasn't of sound mind. We'll just find an old draft or make one, it'll be cleaner that way." The crowd erupted, gasps, whispers, chairs scraping. The mediator raised a hand. "Order." Dad's face drained of color. His mouth opened, but no sound came out. He looked at Mom, at Sloane, then at me, eyes full of something between rage and terror. I stood, calm, almost gentle. "You taught me silence was strength, remember? Guess you were right. It's just that this time, mine's louder." The mediator cleared her throat. "This matter is no longer purely civil. I'm recommending a formal investigation into document fraud and property interference." Sloane buried her face in her hands. Mom began to cry, not the dramatic kind, but the quiet, real kind that sounds like defeat. Dad just stared at me. "You think this makes you better than us?" "No," I said. "It just makes me free." The sheriff, who'd been standing by the wall all along, stepped forward. "Mr. and Mrs. Quinn, Miss Mercer, you'll need to stay after the session." The mediator closed her notebook. Meeting adjourned. The sound of chairs scraping echoed like thunder. People stood, whispering, stealing glances. Caleb packed our folders methodically, his movements crisp and calm. Nora, sitting in the back row, mouthed one word at me: "Truth." As the hall emptied, June walked up beside me. "You okay?" she asked softly. I looked toward the window where the late light hit the snow outside, gold bleeding into blue. "Yeah," I said. "For the first time, I think I am." But even then, under that small, hard-won piece, a deeper current moved inside me. Slow, deliberate, unyielding. Because what they didn't know was that this wasn't the end. It was just the moment the truth finally learned how to speak. The days after the hearing felt eerily calm, like the mountain itself was exhaling. Snow melted into dark veins along the gravel drive, and the air smelled of wood smoke and thawing earth. My cabin now stood quiet, but not lonely. For the first time, its silence didn't feel like punishment. It felt like permission. Caleb called 2 days later. The mediator's report went through. The sheriff opened an investigation into the forgery. "They can't touch the property anymore, Asher. It's legally sealed in your name." I thanked him, but something in me didn't rest. Legal victory wasn't enough. Not after what they'd done to Grandma, to me, to the truth itself. I wanted something cleaner, quieter, more permanent. So, I built a plan, not revenge in the way they'd understand it, but preservation. The kind that lasts longer than any headline or apology. Step 1 was transparency. I posted every document online: the revocation, the notarized will, the recorded meeting, even the fake draft June had found. No commentary, no hashtags. Just facts. Within a week, the story spread. The same people who'd whispered about my bloodline now whispered about my father's lies. Step 2 was legacy. I met with the Historical Society and signed an MOU, granting them oversight rights to preserve the cabin's original architecture. In exchange, they made the site untouchable: no development, no demolition. Ruth's covenant clause from the letter took effect. If the structure's heart is destroyed, its protection reverts to the town. Even in death, She'd written her own shield. Step 3 was the land. The Oregon deed arrived by mail, a surprise inheritance from Ruth's estranged sister, Sylvia. 200 acres of untamed hills. I sold half to a conservation trust, then used the rest to build something small, a restoration retreat. A place for people like me forgotten, cut off, rebuilding from ash. Every nail I drove into the new cabin echoed like an answer to all their noise. One evening, I opened Ruth's letter again. Her handwriting was fading, but her words stayed sharp. Keep it, or don't, but make the choice on your own terms. I poured a glass of her old whiskey, leaned back in the rocking chair, and looked out across the lake. Down the hill, the town lights flickered in the dark, distant and harmless. They thought they'd buried me under the weight of family, of shame, of silence. But all they'd done was hand me the one weapon they never understood: truth, wrapped in patience. And the thing about truth is, once it's set free, it doesn't fade. It builds. It roots. It remembers. If you've ever felt like the outsider in your own family, hit that subscribe button. Because stories like this aren't just mine. They belong to anyone who's ever had to rebuild from nothing. Leave a comment and tell me where you're watching from. And remember, revenge doesn't always come with shouting or fire. Sometimes, it's the sound of your own peace echoing back at you. The truth is, this story isn't over. Not for me. Not for anyone who's still trying to heal what family tried to break. Stay tuned. There's more coming. Always more.